I thank you, everyone, and I thank you for being here. So the last few weeks, we kind of laid out the essence of the teaching, the essence of our entry point, if you will, call it that, into our journey, onto our journey. This journey of self-discovery, this self with a big S, capital S, self-discovery, self-realization. What we are is we are some part of that spirit that is incarnated into this human experience. As we have grown, we have come to accept the human experience as reality, and other things as perhaps wishes or wills or illusions or dreams, but not reality. And as we start to grow spiritually, we start to recognize that our human experience is only one experience, and it is only a partial experience of who and what we are. Like the symbol of the iceberg that we use in the training classes to talk about the difference between conscious mind and subconscious mind. Our human experience, our human reality, is only the tip of the iceberg above the water. But we are connected with all of life, with all of God, with all of love, with all of peace. We're connected with all of that at a deeper level. And as we grow spiritually, we start to come into the awareness of that reality. And we wish to grow in a deeper realization of it. So spirit has descended, if you want to think of it this way. Think of the the symbol of religious science, the circle with two horizontal lines, so the circle is divided evenly in thirds. And it's got a letter V inside that circle. Spirit descends down into the experience within matter. But then our intelligence, our awareness, our realization, our experience ascends back. That's the two strokes of the V. The down and the up. So we are coming into awareness, we are coming into a realization that we are more than this bag of bones and chemicals and things like that science would tell us we are. I remember when I was a kid in high school, somebody came up with a factoid, I have no idea if it's true or not, but they came up with this factoid that if you could reduce the human body to all of the chemicals within, in those days it was worth about $1.86 or some minuscule amount like that. We are more than that, see. We are more than a couple of dollars worth of chemicals. I was reading Fenwick Holmes this morning. He says, even if we could take all of the chemicals in a plant, and we could shape all of those chemicals into the shape of the plant. He was talking about a lily. He was talking about the bulb of a lily. He says there would be something missing. It would not be alive. So what is this life? What is this life that animates this handful of chemicals that our bodies can be reduced to? What is this life that is becoming more aware of itself every day in us, as us, and through us? And how do we cooperate with that awakening? How do we participate, consciously participate in this awakening, in this ascent from matter back up to spirit, this upward stroke of the V. And that's really what we're talking about, what we've been talking about. And the techniques of our spiritual practice are techniques that are by design to help us on that journey, to help us to make that ascent. Now, as we come into this realization, I think we have to be aware that in the human experience there is no shortage of opinion. There's no shortage of opinion about everything and anything. You know, I love. I guess it's the Jimmy Kimmel show. I love when he goes out on the street. He has somebody go out on the street with a microphone, and they stop people on the street, and they ask them their opinion about something that never happened. You know, and they'll say to him, "Now, did you see on the news last night?" And they'll just make up some wild story, you know. And people don't even blink, you know. Now, they probably, if they do, they're edited out, because that's not great entertainment. But the ones that they do show, these people with a straight face begin to answer a question and state their opinion about something that never happened. So I think what we have to be careful of then is to accept opinions without testing them, without trying them to see if they be true. And this includes our own opinions, right? That's one of the hard parts, I think, for us as we grow, is to be able to step back and be that witness and be that observer and become aware of the fact that the thoughts that we have may be no more valid than the opinions of anyone else. We become the witness, we become the observer. That's an important step, right? So as we grow, as we awaken into our incarnation here on earth, as we become aware of our surroundings and our parents and our siblings and all of these things, we just assume that our experience is the right experience and the valid experience, and it's the same experience that everyone else is having. A thought comes up, we think it's our thought. An emotion comes up, we think it's our emotion. An impulse comes up, we think we must act out on it immediately, you know. But as we start to develop spiritual maturity, is probably the closest I can come to describing it. As we start to become more discerning, we can realize that these ideas that come onto our field of awareness, these emotions that come into our psyche, they're not us. We are the one observing them. See, we can become detached from them. And it's really not until we start to do that, I think, that we can really begin our progress in earnest. Somebody put a meme on Facebook a couple weeks ago, and it was attributed to Thich Nhat Hanh. And again, I have no way of knowing if this actually is true. I haven't checked it, but I think it's worth repeating. The idea was that there was no sense trying to teach meditation to young monks because they weren't ready until they learned to stop slamming doors. Now, you could say the flip side of that is that learning to meditate would make us less likely to stop slamming doors. But what I took away from it, my takeaway, is that if we are still so caught up in our own thoughts and ideas and impulses, or so caught up in the thoughts and ideas and impulses that come into our field of awareness, that we think they are ours and we must act out upon them, it's very difficult for us to make good progress on our spiritual growth. So all I'm saying there is we must be aware of the fact that just because somebody says it's so, doesn't mean it's so. Just because I say it's so doesn't mean it's so. Just because you say it's so doesn't mean it's so. We we had a VHS tape we used to show at the center, and it was the Dalai Lama was in London, and he was doing a series of lectures on the Four Noble Truths. And after the lecture, he had a question and answer session. And of course, the audience was filled with young Buddhist monks and nuns who had come to hear the Dalai Lama speak. And this one young monk came up to the microphone and asked a question. And I have no idea what the question was anymore. I may not have even understood it at the time, because it was about some fine point of Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. And the Dalai Lama answered the question, and he said to the young monk, he says, well, in such and such a scripture, this is the way so-and-so answered it. In such and such a scripture, that's the way a different person answered it. Here's my opinion as to what the answer to that is. He said, and the Dalai Lama said, now, having said that, that's not a good enough reason for you to believe it. He said, you must find out for yourself. You must examine for yourself. You must explore for yourself until you determine what your truth about that is. In other words, he was challenging this young monk to explore, to be aware of the fact that other people's opinions may not apply to him. Other people's opinions may not be real, be accurate. It may just be their opinion based on their life experience. And the true seeker goes to find out for themselves. So in that regard, we come to this topic of desire. Excuse me. And I think it fits nicely after our laying the groundwork of the basics of what we teach, and then last week ending with, well, how do you use it? How do you use it? There's this power in the universe, responds to us according to our belief. What do I do with that? Well, it all starts with desire. What is it that you want to have happen now? In Emma Curtis Hopkins, in one of her books, she talks about talking about our good. I love her teaching. It's pretty deep. It's pretty esoteric at times, but I love her teaching. She was very, very, very absolute, very grounded in the mystical, if there is such a thing. And she said, our teaching is simple. We tell the truth about God until it shows up in our lives. That's it. See, that's it. She said, God only works in truth. And we tell the truth about God until it shows up in our lives. And we must name our good. We must name this thing that we want to keep talking about until it shows up in our lives. And she even goes further and she says, if you find yourself complaining about something or someone, if you will examine that, underneath your complaint is a belief that there's a good that you should have and you don't have it, and you're separated from it. And this way you can take the things that you find irritating in situations and in people and ask yourself, is this revealing to me a good that I think I ought to have and I don't have? And once we identify that, then we speak our truth about that good until it appears in our lives. It's very simple. It's absolutely simple. Truth is simple, you know. It's the explanation that's difficult. I love Emmett Fox. He said, why is it that, you know, we can take 2 or 3 sentences from the Bible and it'll take a preacher an entire Sunday to talk about them, you know? But the truth is simple. But our explanation of the truth is very, very convoluted because we have not yet grasped it, perhaps. We're trying to liken it to other things that we have learned or known. Remember I said last week there's connecting, reflecting, connecting. We're trying to connect it to other things. So with regard to this thing called desire, I think we need to stop and look at it and become comfortable with what we're talking about, because it is much misunderstood. It is much talked down about. And it is most important because it is the starting point of our new experience. And I just want you to think about it, how simple that is, right? You have to want a different experience before you'll do something about it, just in pure human living terms, not in spiritual terms, you know. I mean, if you go down to a big amusement park and you stand at the gate with your microphone like the man on the street reporter, you know, and just ask a simple question: why are you here? What do you think people are going to say? Well, we've wanted to come here for a long time. We've been saving up our money and all these, but they wanted, you know. Now, if it was in the 60s, you might somebody say, well, I don't know, I just kind of wound up here. Not exactly sure where I am or how I got here. But for the most part, you're going to find people who had a deliberate intention to be there. Now, here's why it is important that we have a deliberate intention. Here's why it is important that we have a desire. And we're going to talk about trying to reclaim this word, which has become a bad word in our society. I was at one time I was conducting workshops, and they're called Finding Your Life Mission. And I wanted to put an ad in the newspaper in Raleigh. And my wording was discover and live your passion. That was the kind of the byline of the workshop. And the person who reviewed the classified ads for the paper called me and told me they didn't think they could run that ad. And I asked, why not? And he said, well, it has the word passion in it. And I said, yes. And they said, well, some of our readers might be offended by that, you know. And I chuckled a little bit, you know. And I suppose some of them could, but it's kind of like the ink blot test, you know. What they read out of it is not what was written into it. And it's the same with desire. So here's why it is important that we clarify our desires, and then we're going to try to clarify why it's okay to do so, right? So we live in a universe that is a spiritual system. And thought is a spiritual energy. Thought is a movement of energy upon itself. Fenwick Holmes tells us you can take every other kind of energy in the world, and it's generated in some way, but thought is not. Thought is its own movement of energy within itself. So we live in this universe that responds to us according to our belief. Now I want you to think of the law of mind as you would gravity, as an impersonal power. Now we don't understand how gravity works. Right? There's still every day you read the articles on the internet, and they're still talking about whether, you know, Newton was right or Einstein was right, and maybe neither was right, and all these kind of things. But the fact is, we know that gravity is, we know that it works, we know enough about how it works to describe its operation mathematically, but we still don't know what it is. But that doesn't stop us from working with it. We don't know what it is, but it doesn't stop us from working with it. Once we come to understand that it is there, and we come to some understanding of how it works, then we can cooperate with it. So if you were building a mill, a water mill, or if you were building an aqueduct, like the Romans built aqueducts thousands of years ago, you start to learn that if you have a certain downward pitch to your sluice, that the water will flow down it. Right? You know, when I was doing heating and air, we knew that we had to run the drain lines, and we had to have, I think it was an inch a foot or something like that, but there was a known slope that we had to have so that the water in the drain line would cooperate with gravity. So we knew enough about it to work with it, but we still don't know what it is. So we live in this universe that we believe is a spiritual system. We believe that thought is a movement of energy within that system. And we believe that there's a power in that system that responds to that thought and then brings about the circumstances that are the perfect outpicturing of it. In biblical terms, God said, let there be planets, and there were planets. Okay? in our own lives, the same thing is true to the extent that we provide the opening in our consciousness to do so. Now, just as gravity works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether we are consciously cooperating with it or not. I mean, we're not running drain lines every day. We're not building sluices for a water mill every day. But gravity is always working. Gravity is always with us. So now we have this, what we call the law of mind, the power by which it is done unto us according to our belief. And it is always working with us. It is always working through our belief. It just doesn't turn on in that period of 15 or 20 minutes in the morning where we sit down and say, this is my intention for the day. It is with us all the time. And it works according to our conscious belief as well as our subliminal belief. Right? Like the iceberg, there's part of the iceberg we can see and there's a whole lot more that we can't see. Well, if you consider this thing we call our consciousness, there's just a little bit that we are aware of. There's a whole lot that we're not aware of. And there's a part where we are connected to all. To all. Dr. Holmes would call that race consciousness. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. So my point is that this power that responds to us according to our belief is always working whether we are aware of our belief or we are not aware of our belief. And it is always responding whether we deliberately place our intention into it, for lack of a better way of saying it. We deliberately decide what it is that we shall have, or whether we just get up and go about our business without giving it a thought. If we wish to have a different experience, we must decide to have it. We must set our intention into the law. We must become aware of some desire within us that is seeking fulfillment, and we must choose to accept it. We must choose to accept. And that's important, right? Everything that comes up, we don't have to choose to accept. This is kind of impulse control. This is becoming the observer or the witness of our thoughts. Now, when we are developing and we are at a different level of spiritual maturity, we think everything comes up we've got to have, you know. And of course, the advertisers make fortunes off of that. I mean, what is the purpose of the advertisements on the television and the radio and things? It is to arouse within us this desire to have whatever it is that they are selling, and then we think, oh, I need to have that. I need to go buy that, you know. We find ourselves going through the store and there's that thing. It's right on the end of the aisle. I just saw that on TV last night. I'm going to have one of those, you know. To the point where people don't even know what it is that they're asking for. One time I went to see the doctor for a checkup, and I said, you know, do people ever come in and just ask for something they saw on TV and they don't even know what it is? And she just shook her head and she said, all the time. All the time. They see a commercial on TV and they think, oh, I need that. And they come in and they ask, say, well, I need such and such. And the doctor says, well, what symptoms do you have? I don't know, I need that pill. I saw that pill on TV. The advertisers had figured out a way to get into our subconscious emotions and our subconscious desires and to awaken them. Because most of our culture is not yet at the point where it can say, not for me, not mine. I don't need to latch on to that. But as we grow, then we have to become clear about what we do want to latch on to. We must decide. Spirit has created us out of itself to experience life in some new way as us and through us. And it cannot do for us what it has created us to do for itself. We must decide. Now, sometimes people don't decide. Sometimes I hear people say, well, God knows better than I do what I need here, so I'm just going to leave it in God's hands. And then something manifests, and it looks very familiar to them, and they say, oh, yep, see, there it is. Well, what has happened there is the power of the law working through their subliminal or subconscious belief has given back to them that which they have believed in, and it looked very familiar to them. Now, that's not to say that divine guidance does not exist. Of course it exists. But we must have our intention to seek that guidance, and then we must decide to accept that guidance. We must decide to act upon it. We can't throw everything over the fence, if you will, into God's part of the court and say, here, handle it. Handle it. It doesn't work that way. You have been created to decide how you will express joy in this life, how you will experience love in this life. And you must do so. Nobody can do it for you. I can't do it for you. No one can do it for you. But everybody will have an opinion. Everybody will have an opinion of how you should do it. And part of growing is not listening to the opinions, but going within and finding that answer within. So the first point, or the first part here is, if we wish to have a different experience in life, if we wish to grow more deeply every day in our awareness of the presence and the activity of God, we must have that desire, we must have that intention, and we must set that intention. As Amicus Hopkins said, we must name our good. Instead of spending so much time talking about what we don't want, we need to start talking about what we do want. We must set our intention. And unless and until we are able to develop ourselves enough to not become entangled with every thought and every emotion that goes through our head, and to deliberately choose that which we wish to experience, unless and until we do that, life is always going to be very much the same. We're just going to go have the same experiences over and over and over again. We'll have a job that maybe we don't like, and then go someplace else and have another job that we don't like for pretty much the same reasons. We'll leave one relationship that wasn't working for us, and we'll go into another relationship that doesn't work for us for pretty much the same reasons. I think it was John Kabat-Zinn who wrote the book, No Matter Where You Go, There You Are. Maybe it was a different author, I don't know, but the point is the same. Wherever we go, we bring ourselves, we bring our consciousness, and unless and until we deliberately choose to change our consciousness, we will continue to have the same experience over and over and over. So we recognize there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. We recognize that we have the ability to develop whatever belief we choose. We recognize that unless and until we do make conscious use of this law, we are continuing to make unconscious use of this law. It would seem then that like the commercial said, choose wisely. It would seem that what we want to do then is we want to decide. We want to get in touch with what is our heart telling us now. Not what is our intellect telling us, what is our ego telling us. What is our heart telling us right now? But in order to do that, sometimes we have to overcome blocks, barriers, and boundaries in consciousness. And there are many of them around desire. So there are many opinions about desire. And just like my choice of the word passion in the newspaper ad, the word desire is actually perceived as bad by people. Some people say, oh, you should not use that word. That's a terrible word. Because in their mind it brings up God only knows what. So one of the nicest ways I've ever heard to frame it was, think of desire as de, which means from in the Latin and the languages derived from Latin, And sire, S-I-R-E, from the Father, from the Father. So we can start to think of desire as being an urge, a divine urge that is put within us. Remember I said Meister Eckhart says God clears its throat so we'll find it like the child playing hide and seek. There's a divine urge within us that has been placed there since before we took these bodies. And it is seeking fulfillment. Seeking fulfillment. So we have to realize that we as human beings, we can have desires that are not in the highest good of all concerned. We can have greed, we can have anger, we can desire revenge, and all of those different things, that probably the list of the 7 capital sins that we grew up with, are desires in a direction that is not for the highest good of all. Or we can desire love and peace and harmony, and health and prosperity, and all of these things that are good for everyone. The choice is ours. Excuse me, can I get a drink of water? The choice is ours. But we have to make it. So in one regard, I think what has happened is because human beings have misused desire, it has gotten a bad reputation. And Dr. Holmes would tell us, if we think of the law, it's like electricity. We can use it to cook our food, or we can accidentally hurt ourselves. But that doesn't mean that the law is bad. It just means that we have misused it. Desire in itself is not a bad thing, but there needs to be a sort of a sanity check on it. And Dr. Holmes gives us a very simple one. Does this thing that we desire give a greater expression to life, to love, to truth, or beauty? Should be one of those, yes. Maybe more. Does it harm another in some way? Does it try to take anything from another in some way? That is as close to an ethical construct or a moral code as he gave us. We don't need others to tell us right from wrong because we already know right from wrong. Is this thing I desire for the highest good of all? If so, there's nothing wrong with it. If so, go for it. If so, the entire universe supports you in this desire. So that's all we need to do. If we have a desire, we just need to look at it and say, well, what is it that I desire? What is it that I want to have happen right now? And is it for the highest good of all concerned? If we go to the East, here comes another bit of confusion that when it comes to the West, we kind of get confused about it. And it is this teaching that we get from Buddhism that says the cause of suffering is our desires. And it's true, it's true. I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm saying that it's true. But we kind of misconstrue that, I think. We kind of misconstrue that and we say, well, then we should have no desires. If we have no desires, we have no suffering. Right? And we desire not to have suffering. So we desire not to have desires. I was taking a class one time with a Hindu philosopher, professor of philosophy at Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he looked at the class and he said, isn't a desire to have no desires still a desire? And everybody went, oh my goodness, it is. So to say that I desire to have no desires is in itself a desire, and we have already failed before we have started. So perhaps there's a different understanding or a different meaning, right? So we desire to eat, but that's not a bad desire. Our bodies need food to do the things that we came to do. Our bodies need water to do the things that we came to do. So the way that I think Dr. Holmes deals with this, and what makes sense to me, is we want to empty ourselves of selfish desires. We want to empty ourselves of self-serving desires. We want to empty ourselves of the greed and all of those other things. Those that are desires that we want to get rid of. And our ultimate desire is for the highest good of all. And even deeper than that, our ultimate desire is simply to experience God. To experience God. So if we can sit and ask ourselves the question, what do I want to have happen now? What do I want to have happen now? We were taught this in practitioner training when somebody comes in for treatment work, People like to talk about the situation and the problem, and we need to give them a little bit of time to do that. But at some point we've got to stop and say, but what do you want to have happen now? Let's stop talking about what you don't want. Let's start talking about what you do want. So what is it you want to have happen now? Do you want a greater experience of health? Do you want a greater experience of wealth? Do you want a greater experience of love? Do you want a greater experience of fulfillment and satisfying work? Do you want a greater experience of fulfilling and satisfying relationships with other people? Do you want to know your spiritual path and practice it? Those are the 5 general areas that people have wants in or have desires. Excuse me. And once we can name our good, once we can name our good, then we can come to an understanding of, is it in the best interest of everyone concerned? Does it give a greater expression to life and to love and to truth and to beauty? Does it try to rob anyone or harm anyone in any way? And if it passes that sanity test, that morality test, then what I invite us to do is look at it and say, but what is God? What is God inviting me to experience as this desire is fulfilled through me? What is the divine nudging me to experience, you see? So here's the very simple way I look at it, and I'll just toss it out there because maybe it'll make sense to you. We come from the wholeness, we come from the oneness, and we have come into this experience of separation. And our journey is to return back into that oneness, but individualized, unique, because of our experience, because of what we have learned, and all of those things. We are developing a uniqueness. Excuse me, as we are slowly coming back into realization of what we are. In our experience of separation, we have ideas of separation. If we are to return to the oneness, those ideas of separation will have to go. Right? They'll have to be dissolved. And the way that they get dissolved is that we become aware of a desire within us. That the only way that desire can be fulfilled is by us dissolving some area of separation in our lives, in our consciousness. In other words, if our desire is for a greater experience of health, then we must come to understand that God is health, the perfect outpicturing of health. And the divine has never been sick a day. So any appearance of sickness in our lives is not divinely ordained. Right? God didn't send it to us to teach us a lesson or to test us in any way. We have to start naming our good and telling the truth about God. God is perfect health. The good that I am seeking is health. God is my health. The good I am seeking is God. So we become aware of this desire and we say, what is it? What is it? See, what is it that Spirit is nudging me toward here? And it's always nudging us towards itself. And it's always leading us right to the very ideas that we are ready to let go of. I wouldn't have this desire if it wasn't possible for fulfillment. And I wouldn't have this desire if it was not appropriate for me to let go of whatever it is that has been in the way. So we need to get over this idea that we shouldn't have desires. We shouldn't have desires, or we shouldn't entertain desires that are not for the highest good of all. But when we come to recognize that Spirit desires to know itself anew through us, then we can surrender to those desires. Right? God is desiring an experience as me. That's why I am here. That's why I have been created. Now, one other opinion that comes up around desires that I want to shoot down right now is this one. Almost like an oxymoron or circular logic, right? So here's the other one that I've heard, is that you should not have a desire, because if you have a desire, you're admitting that you don't have something. And if you believe you don't have something because it's done unto you according to your belief, you will continue to not have it. Something along those lines. But they never get to the flip side of that and say, well, then what do we do? What do we do? Well, certainly we go around declaring our oneness with all things. Absolutely we do that. But Holmes says we're not to delude ourselves. We're not to pretend. He says if you're treating for perfect blood pressure, your work isn't done until the doctor measures your blood pressure and says it's perfect. And we're not trying to fool ourselves. We're not trying to pretend. We're just trying to cooperate with the way things work. So, again, excuse me for this. So the way that I have come to understand that is, of course, everything is already perfect in God. And in reality, below that level of the iceberg, below the water, everything is perfect. But my experience is not yet perfect because my consciousness is not yet perfect. And what I am declaring is, my intention is to eliminate ideas of separation. And if we turn that around into kind of a positive statement, instead of what I want to get rid of, my intention is to experience to a greater degree the unity that already exists. That's what I want. But sometimes we need a very specific example of that, or a very specific task to work on to do that. So we become aware of health, or we become aware of prosperity, or we become aware of love. We become aware of satisfaction and fulfillment in the workplace. We become aware of spiritual practice. We become aware of these different things because that's where we are ready to grow. That's where we are ready to grow at that point in time. Raymond Charles Barker used to say, you have become aware of a problem because you are the one to solve the problem. Now, one way we could take it is well, I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to solve all these problems. And I don't think that that's what that meant. I think what that meant was we have become aware of the problem because we are to solve the problem in our own consciousness, to solve the ideas of separation, to experience the unity and the oneness. What is it you want to have happen now? What is your greatest desire? What are you willing to do about it? From the East, we're given the parable of, do you want to know God as much as you would want a pond if your hair was on fire? How strong is your desire? Is it something you're only willing to give a few minutes in the morning and a few minutes in the evening to? Or is it something you are willing to, as we were taught in school as kids, to repeat over and over, the good that I am seeking is health, and God is my health. The good that I am seeking is a loving relationship. God is my loving relationship. You see, we just keep reminding ourselves, just keep telling the truth about the good that we wish to experience in our lives. Just keep telling the truth until it appears. And in so doing, we are dissolving the barriers of consciousness that up until now we have allowed to separate us. We don't know how they got there. It doesn't matter how they got there. It doesn't matter who turned the light out in the room. If it's dark, you just turn the light back on. Turn the light of God's love on. Turn it on into your consciousness. Become aware of what it is that you want to have happen now. Ask yourself how that serves the higher good. Ask yourself how that gives an outlet to divine expression through you and as you. And then stay focused on it. Stay focused on it with your spiritual practice. Stay focused on it during the day to remind yourself of it. Stay focused on it at night before you go to bed. We keep at it until the demonstration is made. We keep at it until our consciousness has changed. We keep at it until we have provided a greater opening, or the avenue, as Dr. Holmes calls it, through which the demonstration can be made. Desire is the starting point of all achievement. Let's get in touch with ours. Make sure they are rightful ones, good for everyone. And let's go to work with them. Let's cooperate. And so it is.